For those that just joined, good morning, everyone. We're just giving people a few more seconds and then to sign in, then we'll get started. Sure, it's a familiar Zoom phrase heard all around the world.
That and you're still muted.
Yeah. Yeah. Shouldn't you be muted?
Aren't I?
No. Okay, it's 10:02. On that note, on that amusing entry, we'll get started. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Kent Roberts. I'm the VP of Policy here at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be your host for this morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. I acknowledge the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognize that we are all treaty people. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation on localizing our procurement strategy. I was close to this topic for a number of years while I was in government. I'm absolutely thrilled to host this conversation and keep it top of mind for our community. I believe now, probably more than ever, as we begin to crawl out from under this, the weight of this pandemic, that we need to find more ways to energize and build our local economies. And certainly local procurement is one of those. And, the pandemic certainly taught us a number of lessons, and one of those being the importance of a strong local supply chain. And now that Nova Scotia is about to hit a huge milestone in our population, which could happen any day now, 1 million people, it's time to take action on keeping our hard-earned capital here in the province. We all know, I think, that dollars spent locally are well-spent dollars. The money that gets spent locally is then reinvested into our communities, creating more and more opportunities for Nova Scotians. Our panelists today have extensive experience in building a local supply chain and will help walk us through what a successful localized procurement strategy could look like in our province and why it's critically important. We're going to hear from each of them, then we'll move into a panel discussion, and then we'll finish up with a live Q&A. So please put any questions you may have in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we get to as many of them as we can. So on that note, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First of all, Brad Smith, who's the Executive Director of Mainland Nova Scotia Building Trades. So welcome, Brad. Thank you. David Upton, CEO of Common Good Solutions and the Social Enterprise Institute. Welcome, David. Matthew Martels, Chief Operating Officer at the Black Business Initiative. Welcome, Matthew. And Brian Darrell and Genevieve Sharkey. Brian is with the Provincial Government's Department of Seniors and Long-Term Care, and Genevieve is Director of Procurement Operations, and that's where I'm going to leave that, Genevieve. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. And at this point, I'll turn over to Brad. We'll start with Brad, and please tell us about your perspective and your work on local procurement.
Thanks very much, Ken. Just to a little bit of perspective from my background, I spent most of my career on the demand side of economic development. And around that, it was working with how to get the projects going, development processes around that. And just in the last 9 years, I've gone from the demand side to the supply side. So it's offered me a unique opportunity to see how the two interact with each other and how that grows the economy. So the context to that is that we have a very large workforce. We have about 15,000. You look at it in total, and that's local workforce and very good financially stable jobs. And so that's our world. We live on the supply side every day around that on the supply chain. But what I want to do with this is just take a look at it. There's many different types of capital. And I think when everybody sees the word capital, they think financial capital. We all can look at a balance sheet and see that pretty quickly. And then there's also social capital, there's political capital, there's built environment capital. But really for today, I wanted to kind of take the macro lens around capital and focus on the human capital. And the reason I want to focus on that in terms of supply chain is that about 2/3 of our GDP is generated from the wages and benefits and consumer confidence. And so when we think about the capital that gets spent to build a structure, then it's a lot of the benefits that comes back to community is from the wages and benefits and the consumer confidence around that. And so when I'm kind of framing this up this way, if you think of Nova Scotia as one big company with many different purchasing departments, Let's think about how you optimize that supply chain. I'll give you an example. If you think about the Irving shipyard, just in a simple example, we do not build guns and we do not make steel. So a lot of the economic benefits we're getting from that project are from the wages and benefits of that project, of the local workforce working in that project. And so when we're looking at how do we optimize capital, I want to put a bit of a lens on it, is how do you optimize it, not just the financial capital to spend, but think about how you optimize the human capital, which then builds the community and moves things forward that way. Just a little bit, very quickly, on how procurement has evolved, and then where this so if you look at the 1850s and 1970s, it was lowest price, avoid risk, and then we come into the 1970s, and of course it became to protect the environment was added into it. And now you're looking at certainly 2000 and even more so just in the last couple of years, the social value of procurement. So really looking at that supply chain, that procurement chain, on how do you make it better in terms of moving it through and getting the optimum value. So a lot more lenses. So the reason I say that is because we need to be shifting from a lowest cost model to what are we doing to optimize the value of that procurement? What are we doing to in the big picture? And that happens at individual company levels, but also as in terms of an economy like the province of Nova Scotia. And the reason I highlight that is that it takes more effort and it has more risk when you start adding all the, it's easy to measure lowest cost. Like I don't think there's ever been a procurement officer that's been fired for taking lowest cost. That's an easy one because it's very measurable. When you start adding in what's the social value, what's the long-term value, net present values, all those other components around procurement, it gets more complex, takes more work and effort around that, but it also has the greatest benefit. So I always like to say, and we'll just touch on this, we call it the ESG lens. What's the environment, social, and governance? And when I'm talking about that is you're looking at some companies now that really you cannot get capital unless you are following those ESGs. So, some of the biggest capital companies, so you want to know where things are going, follow the money, and the money's going, hey, if you don't have responsible contractor policies, if you do not have environmental and good governance and all those other components, that money is being shifted away. And it's phenomenal how many millions and trillions of dollars are now shifting based on the ESG lens. And so when you think about that in terms of workforce development, again, that's a component of this, you got to think about the long term. If you go lowest cost workforce, are you investing in the training? Are you investing in the apprenticeship? Are you investing with fair wages and things like that? All of those things drive the community benefit as things move forward. And so when you think about that, that the physical asset, once it's built, is built. And when the piece of equipment is built, it's all those other pieces around the supply chain and getting the optimizing the benefit for that. Now, we've got some the other colleagues are going to give some really good examples sort of at the micro level, but I'm going to talk just a couple things at the macro level in terms of government procurement as an example. So right now, the province, as you're going to hear, has got the largest amount of procurement going on in our history. And in terms of take it down to an individual level, it means that somebody can start their trades career at a project and finish and be a journey person at the end of that project. That if we have things like the requirements for community benefits as part of those projects, those are lasting legacy pieces. There's going to be a requirement for 25% of apprentices, 10% underrepresented groups. And I guess the colleagues from the province procurement will talk about that. But in terms of the importance of that, a lot of the procurement across the country is shifting on that. And virtually every government department has a responsibility to do something around social prosperity. And that's when you need leadership. That's where the leadership comes from, is when you have organizations do that way. And again, how do you apply it to the individual business? We're going to get some great examples of that. But the point being is that it's not about lowest bid anymore. You really need to be thinking about how do we move that forward all the way through. And the benefit to that is that when you do that, you get about $1.80 return for every dollar you put into community benefits. It's a great economic benefit because that money starts to spin and churn throughout the economy. And so just what I would say is that, at one time you think, oh, well, I'm doing my social good by giving some money to charity. We really need to start thinking about, what are you doing with the 95% that is creating the economic and social benefit and long-term sustainable assets that's growing the workforce. And again, that's the people with the wages that are generating about 2/3 of our GDP. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. That was extremely informative. I learned a lot on that in that 5 or 6 minutes, so really appreciate that. Okay, next, shifting gears, Dave, over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
I like to set the bar low at the start, which is okay. So my name is David Upton. A lot of the work that we do over the past half a dozen years or so has been around policy, much of it relating to how to invest strategically to not just provide lowest cost, but to provide best value for governments, municipal, provincial, and federal. So the piece that I wanted to add to this was sort of the whole notion of community capital, and it's sort of to carry it forward from what Brad was talking about. And there's sort of 4 elements to that, and that's communities need to be healthy, the people in communities need to be healthy, the economy needs to be healthy, and we need to protect the environment. All of those things. It's hard to say, which one trumps the other, but the real reality in society right now is that the 2 biggest challenges we face are poverty and climate change. And if we can't find ways to mitigate the worst, most egregious components of those 2 things, we're on a bad track. So procurement is one of the bright shining lights that allows us all to do better without significantly increasing societal costs. In fact, there's some argument to be made that it can reduce costs to society by doing it this way, certainly in the long run. So when I was thinking about how we would do this, I wanted to talk about the government, the Nova Scotia Canada Infrastructure Agreement. So the government of Canada and the government of Nova Scotia signed a contract a number of years ago that committed our province to reporting on any contracts in excess of $10 million related to procurement. As Brad suggested, we have the most public procurement going on over the next number of years in the history of the province. So these procurement agreements are required or expected to provide support to at least 3 types of beneficiaries, and they include African Nova Scotians, they include First Nations peoples, they include small and medium-sized enterprises, they include social businesses. It's a targeted thing, and the expectation is that the province of Nova Scotia will report on those outcomes. So the other piece that I want to talk about was the whole issue of the supply chain and how we do this well. So there are 3 components to the work we all have to do, and one is we need to have communities fully engaged in the process of building the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So what they might want to do in Sydney and what might want to be done in Halifax don't have to be the same. In fact, they can be different, but communities need to be at that table. And by communities, I mean equity seeking groups, municipal units, just people with a vested interest in the outcome. The government has to be at the table because they're the guys writing the checks, and the contractors have to be at the table. If we can get everybody working together, it's a way of squeezing the most value out of a dollar and truly creating that best value arrangement. So when you're doing demand planning, there are 3 phases of opportunity for public infrastructure investment to create community benefit. One is in the design phase. So you bring people into the conversation in the design phase so that it's whatever's being built, be it a hospital or a large educational facility, is being built in service of the best interest of the community in which it's going to be located. The second phase is in the construction and build phase. I'm not even going to try to compare my knowledge to Brad's about that. He described it very well. And the third phase is the operational and occupancy phase, and the opportunities there for continued community benefit to occur. So the last piece that I want to touch on is the notion of a community benefit agreement. And a community benefit agreement, or CBA, is an agreement between a community, a government, and the developers that ensures that development projects enhance local, social, environmental, and economic opportunities. And these are give and take documents where everybody has to acknowledge that all of the partners at the table have a vested interest in a good outcome. I get excited thinking about the potential of procurement to make a significant change in outcomes in our communities, and to do it without having to invest a whole lot of additional capital into the outcomes. This is there may be a marginal cost, but the value creation will be substantially more than any small marginal cost increase that could occur. I'm gonna wrap it there. I think this is a conversation where there's lots of room to there was one more point maybe, and that is the whole notion of local procurement. Sheena Russell is a young woman that I know. She runs a company called Made with Local. She was interviewed by Bloomberg last week or the week before, and she was talking about her supply chain and how her company's been able to grow despite all the challenges that she's faced through COVID. Her company's been able to grow, and she's been able to grow because she had a local supply chain. So if we want to deliver contracts on time, if we want to, then we want to get metal cut and prefabricated in Nova Scotia, maybe because of the local potential there, than we do having it cut and manufactured in Hamilton or New England. I think that we need to start to think about, I read an article this week that right now a container leaving China takes 40 days to arrive in Halifax, plus about 14 days on average between clearing the docks in China and clearing customs in Canada. So we're looking at 55-day supply line. That's in optimal conditions during COVID. So I think there's lots for us to consider. Thank you.
Thanks for that, David. Always insightful. Appreciate it. Matthew, I'll get your thoughts.
Perfect. Thanks, Kent. So just for the folks on the call, my name is Matthew Martel. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Black Business Initiative. And very, very excited to be here and be part of these conversations. In the past few months, I've been sitting on a few different meetings and committees, and it's become pretty apparent that the need for support with procurement in the community is significant. And I think anything that we can do as an organization to get involved in the discussions and bring back information, I think is key for us. So happy to be here. So we do have a little, here we go. So for those of you who don't know, BBI, this year actually we're celebrating our 25th anniversary, which is pretty exciting, and really how we came to be is there was provincial and federal government really looked at what needs are existing in the Black community in terms of business and wealth generation and pieces like that. And through the task force and all the identified needs, our organization was created. And really, I think a lot of the issues that we've recognized are kind of still in play today. So we recognize that, we have issues with business skills, with mentorship, with role models, and really after looking at those needs built this kind of framework on our strategic pillars, our purpose, vision, and mission. So the four pieces I think that I'll really touch on for this is our strategic pillars. And so if we look at procurement, really what we do, it's procurement and procurement assistance really touches all four of our strategic pillars. So helping organizations grow, us supporting them through the navigation of these different programs and different resources that exist, and helping our businesses find those first opportunities in, let's say, the government, for example, and helping them realize what opportunities exist, even if they're not huge organizations that are heavy hitters in their industry. There's likely still a place for them to come in and support. And then also the connecting piece. So all the work that we do, we're kind of constantly on the lookout for partners, such as lots of people here on the call, and seeing how we connect that, how we can connect them with some of our clients, because I think we have some really, really great, talented and competent businesses in our network. But really, it's connecting them with the opportunities that I think there's a bit of a gap there. And then, of course, advocating for our businesses. When I think sometimes when we look at procurement and we look at having these policies that ensure that, let's say, diverse, or let's just use Black-led businesses are in here, and making sure that the policies include them in things like construction. Sometimes it feels like it's almost, there's an underlying expectation that there'll be a sacrifice in quality or time or something, when in reality, now that we're going through that work and we're having those examples of success, I think people are really realizing that that's not the case. It really is just giving the organizations an opportunity to show what they can do. And so, yeah, just back to our needs, I did mention the role models. Access to capital, I think, is challenging. The information for this topic, I think, is the big one. We've done some work with Procurement Assistance Canada, and every time we sit on calls with them, we're just floored at the resources that exist, and we know that there's just such a huge knowledge gap in the community. So anything that we can do, or anything moving past this session that can help support businesses, we're absolutely there to help. And any programs that exist that need help with marketing and helping engage with the community, we're also here to certainly help with that. The main services that we do provide are the business support, the entrepreneurship training, access to funding, promotion and advocacy, which, really, I think even in terms of the participants today in the session, I do see a couple clients. So happy to see that. But again, really for me, it's the action pieces after this, and seeing what we can take away and how we can engage with the partners here on the call. And then just very, very quickly, and this is something that I can certainly share after, is really this is just the best way to connect with us. I know this has been more of an overview of our organization, and so very excited to kind of get into the meat of the discussion and see some of the challenges and even some of the new challenges that we've identified through some COVID research that we've done, and the impact of COVID on Black businesses specifically. I think there's a lot in there that does touch on procurement, and procurement strategies, I think, is one way that we can really come out of this in a more positive way. So thanks for that. And we can pass it over to the next person.
Thank you, Matthew. Really appreciate that insight. And Brian, last but not least, certainly you guys have the biggest room, so you win on that front. So I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you for that. I'm going to go first, and I'm going to give Genevieve a chance to come behind me and tell you that everything I said was wrong. And so I'll begin in that position, okay? We are very fortunate. In fact, we are incredibly fortunate because we are living at perhaps one of the most exciting times in the history of humans on this earth. Because, and that sounds like a very general statement, but I'm going to actually point out 6 things that are colliding at the same time. 6 things. Okay, we've had 3 and 4 before, but 6 this time. We're just coming through COVID, which was a was a very significant thing where we actually, as humans, had to learn how to adjust and live within a small bubble, and where we actually had to rethink of how we did things. We have a dramatic technology change that's taking place in terms of how we can actually pick up the phone or actually go online, don't even have to pick up the phone. We can actually use a little device like your phone and order something that's halfway across the world, or actually order a coffee at your local coffee shop and just walk in and pick it up. We have evolution, we have the environment that's taking place. Right now, we're thinking more consciously of how the environment and how we interact with it. And so we're taking that into consideration as we have to be respectful of this particular factor. We're now considering social justice. I mean, this is something that has been ignored far too long, but we're saying, yes, it's important that we actually recognize the importance of the people around us. We're not all the same, but we actually have to treat those people who are different from us as though they are part of our family, okay? We are actually reaching the end of a generation group, okay? The people that claim that they were the greatest generation, and I'm not going to argue whether they are or not, but they're tending to phase out. They're living longer, they're in better condition than any generation before them, and they're actually starting to move into out of their existing homes, move into a different area. Their wants, needs, and so on are shifting. And what's shifting with them is the greatest amount of capital that the world has ever seen at one time. If we take all of that and we add in the last thing that is really critical, is that in Nova Scotia, at least, and Canada, I would suggest as well, we're in a strong financial position, a strong economic position that is envied among the world, okay? So we've got all of these factors coming together, all of them, and they each play an important role in terms of what's going to happen next. What's going on here is that we're seeing a shift in the labor force. And if I do this correctly, I can actually move to the next slide. And maybe I can't. Yes, there we are. The labor force is changing. And this is great because there are some people who are going to say, we're losing the whole ability to be, the work ethic. But I'm saying that's not the case. What we're seeing is that the labor force is changing because it's being forced to change. It's being forced to change because of the availability of workers. The workers need to reflect the population that serves it. And that has not always been the case, where we've actually moved people into areas that come in from, no, I don't want to sound as though I'm a separatist here, but they'll come in from Ontario or Quebec or someplace, do a job, or come in from Spain, do a job, and then they pack up and leave. And we're happy because we've got that finished product, but that's not the end of the world, okay? This change in terms of the labor force is taking place because the demographics in Canada is changing. No longer are we a nation that's actually made up of a very monoculture. Our population now has got to be one of the most cosmopolitan in the world. So I'm going to move to the next slide if I can do that. Yes, I did. So I want to talk for a few minutes about the project that we have going in Cape Breton. And it actually reflects a lot of what Brad was saying earlier with a bit of input from Dave. In our terms of our labor contracts there, we've actually built into the contract that 25% of the labor force must be registered apprentices. We're actually reaching out and forcing the labor force to catch up to the rest of the province in terms of bringing on the new people and having them trained. So they have to be 25% of the labor force must be registered apprentices. 10% of those representatives have to be from underrepresented population. Now, and this is important because we're not using this as a carrot and a whip where we're actually saying you must do this. We're saying that we're challenging you to surpass this level, okay? And we think it's very possible to do this. It's very possible to actually exceed that level of 10%. And not only do they actually have to be from an underrepresented population, but they must be on the job site. We can't actually have, well, actually, I should talk a little bit more about those apprenticeships, those underrepresented groups. And that's actually made up of 5 different groups. It would be First Nations, African Nova Scotian, women in underrepresented trades. It'll be for newcomers, and finally for those who are disabled, okay? We can't have them sitting in an office pushing paper. We actually need them on the job site picking up those valuable skills. Move to the next slide. So the details are, in terms of making that work, was that we actually set up a committee established by those 5 underrepresented groups, which talks to Dave's point of in terms of having the community engaged in it. So these are community members that are sitting at the table actually representing those 5 groups, and they meet and monitor the progress of the various different projects to ensure that A, those people are there, B, they're actually doing meaningful work, C, that they're actually contributing to the community. Committee meets with the construction manager to understand the labor needs that are coming up so that we can actually schedule training courses to make sure that we can actually do that. So we're not going to be caught in a position where we need drywallers where all we've got are pipe fitters. We're actually staying abreast of what the needs are in the community and on the job site at the time. So what's really important about this is that we are creating a human capital for today, but also we're building capacity in the community for tomorrow. This is not something that's just going to end when the job ends, when the particular project ends and we move on. It's something that's going to be there. Let me go on and talk about this for a moment, because one of the things that I've noticed is that when you actually have, for any kind of sustained development to take place, you need the government to go in first of all and invest capital. The government does this and they actually start the process moving. And then once that the industry can see that, yes, there's some substance here, we see the private sector come in. And I maintain that if we actually watch what's happening now, we're going to see that the private sector picks this up. And without a doubt, it's going to be a requirement that everybody, not just government contracts, but all contracts are going to require that there be a divestiture of the human capital. I'm going to turn it over to Genevieve and challenge you to argue with me.
No arguing here. Hang on a second. My turn to play with this. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday, or as I like to call it, Mini Friday. So why am I here? We are here to talk about procurement. Again, I am a self-declared procurement nerd, as I've already announced to everybody else. And I have been in procurement now for over a decade, and I'm not even going to go further into that. But to what Brad has mentioned, to what David's mentioned, procurement definitely has changed, evolved, and grown. So naturally, I bring up this slide just because we all know we have legal boundaries and policy that we have to follow, which is great. So a bit of an overview. Again, we do have the Sustainable Procurement Policy, our protocols, and our Public Procurement Act. For the government of Nova Scotia, our main clients are government departments as well as Nova Scotia Health. But we do have a further responsibility to other public sector entities. So anyone in the MASH sector, we will coordinate with, discuss, and talk about best practices and ways to evolve in procurement. So that would include the local procurement component, diversity, sustainability. So that's where core government takes that opportunity to kind of come up with those best practices and develop and grow. We do have a legal requirement to go out to public market for the following thresholds. Again, it's very, very low thresholds. I understand. Unfortunately, it is what it is at this point. So it's 10,000 for goods and for government, 50 for services, and 100 for construction. These will change and these will increase over the next few months. But why I bring this up is the fact that there are ways under these thresholds to truly focus and localize where we want to go. Again, these will grow.
Would you call these wiggle room? Would you say you're going to describe the wiggle room now?
I wouldn't say the wiggle room. We still have to operate in a fair, open process, but it's a fair, open process that we can really enhance with the community.
Wiggle.
He's putting words in my mouth, folks. You saw this. But no, it is an opportunity for us to really focus and localize. And again, there are ways to work around that. That's going to go up next. Hang on, let's see if this works. There we go. A bit of background. Nova Scotia has actually had a sustainable component in our Procurement Act and our policy since 2009, which is actually pretty good. We were, I don't want to say ahead of the curve, but we're definitely up front with the rest of the provinces and leading the charge. So again, we've gone through random acts of excellence, which were really disconnected throughout departments. In 2009, we actually went to the sustainable procurement policy, and then it evolved in 2016 to what we have now, which is truly a more coordinated effort with a lot more meat regarding sustainability, social procurement, and again, with certain local components as well. One of them is, again, our process for invitational procurements, which are, again, to be focused to a more local group of vendors. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you read the policy at this point. To us, sustainable procurement is described as a holistic approach to government procurement that considers the environment, economic, and social factors to the goods, services, and construction that are procured. Again, when we are going out to market, we are truly looking at all of those three components as they work hand in hand. Again, Brad, I'm going to bring you in just because you did highlight the low value versus best value. One trend we have seen in Nova Scotia over the past few years is going more towards the best value, because honestly, that's where we can elevate our local community in a fair, open, transparent fashion that again meets with trade agreement requirements, policy requirements, and also supports our province and its people, which is really what, again, we do want to do, but in a fair fashion. Couple of resources in case you're ever interested. Again, I'm not going to go on and on and on about procurement because I think the conversation that we can have after this is way more important, and we can dive into a couple of details. But just know that as government procurement, we are definitely looking at ways to, again, grow, change, and evolve with the community and its practices. Thanks. Any questions?
I'm on mute, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Genevieve. Really appreciate that. So that's great perspective from everybody. Really appreciate that input. What I'd like to do now is sort of just initiate the panel discussion and give everyone a chance to answer some questions and get different perspectives from your different points of view, because you certainly have different points of view and coming at it from a different lens. So, I mean, the goal, you know, the chamber is an advocacy organization, and the goal, one of the goals for me out of this is to really take away some things that are action steps potentially. That what are things that we all need to think about from the different perspectives you guys are providing that we can take forward in our daily work and our daily lives and influence local procurement. So I'm going to throw a bit of a twist, and I hope I don't get beat up for this by you folks. But you know, we had some questions that we're going to ask everyone, but there's just one overriding thing that comes to my mind as I listen to everyone speak, and how important this topic is to everybody, clearly, and how important it could be in the near future of this province from an economic benefit and human capital perspective. You know, whether we're talking about local procurement, best value, community benefit agreements, the environmental and social outcomes. I guess I'd love to hear from everybody. You know, where do you think we are? I mean, we know what's coming down the pipe. Where do we think we are as a province? And, you know, from your perspective, in your place where you sit, what do you think needs to happen to accelerate, you know, this issue to deliver more benefit? So again, that's a bit of a twist, but Brad, I'll throw that to you if you're okay answering that. If not, you can tell me where to go, and we'll go somewhere else.
Well, let me put it this way. I think from government procurement, I think we've moved a long way. About 2016, 2017, the Auditor General report said we had that language in there, but we didn't have measurements. And I think where we jumped ahead now is we actually have concrete measurements. So it drives me crazy when somebody says, oh, we support diversity and inclusion, but we don't want to have targets or measurements. You need targets and measurements. What you measure, you move. And so that's where I think the government went from being behind to jumping ahead, is when they had those targeted measurements. And again, really important, it's, you know, it's not based on an apprentice, it's based on apprenticeshable hours. So you don't get to sit there and throw somebody in for a couple hours and not do anything with it. So the really good targeted measures, and the engaged through sector council, labor force development, contractors, labor, everybody work together on how they could make that together. So that, I think we went from behind to ahead very quickly. And just to the cost point, I think it adds maybe 1 to 4% cost, depending on the community benefits agreement, but that's against, a $1.80 return on investment for doing that. So it's the cost, as I think was mentioned, I think earlier, is minimal to the economic benefit. So I'd say we were behind, we're now starting to lead in some areas. So I think it's in a good direction.
Great, thank you, Brad. Dave, what do you think?
I think that I really see this as a three-legged stool, and we need to have, solid legs under the stool. All three of them need to be solid. Right now, large contractors can do this. If they're bidding large tenders that call for, localized procurement, they know how to do it. They do it in other jurisdictions now. They do it well. I'd say they're ready for the most part. All they're looking for is clear, unequivocal direction about what is expected. I would say that government has come, like Brad suggested, government has come a long way in the last couple of years, and as they set clearer and better defined targets, it makes it easier for contractors, and that process is ongoing. There's still room to improve. I think the real gap right now, the single biggest challenge we have, is that our business community is largely not, particularly the small and medium-sized enterprise component of the business community, is not ready. There's this like huge cloud of new opportunity that's floating over the horizon. We're just looking at it going, we don't know what the hell that is. And I think we need to kind of step up somehow or another to make it more obvious and to make sure that people get ready for those opportunities. So it's, I think we're at the beginning of a journey, or at least wise, we're at the point where the journey can begin, where maybe a few years ago we were, nowhere. As far as sustainable procurement is concerned with the province, I mean, I've been involved almost since 2009 when that procurement strategy was developed. And, we have wandered around trying to figure out how to direct that sustainable procurement policy at opportunities for equity-seeking groups and opportunities for improving local communities. And we've really struggled. And I think there's lots of room there to work, not just on the big $10 million projects, and although those are game changers, but there's all kinds of room to work on $50,000 services jobs and $25,000 product deliveries. In fact, I would suggest that if you want to support equity-seeking groups, that's a damn place to do the work.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, Dave. I think the in the development stage of community businesses, the smaller contracts are the ones that are going to get them scaled, if at all. There's not many that are going to jump into a $10 or $20 million contract at this point.
And how do we get those Black-owned businesses, those First Nations-owned businesses, those immigrant-owned businesses at the damn table so they can be ready to bid on those things, so they can get on supplier lists? That's the work. That's the work that we need, that we're really just scratching the surface of. And I mean, you have to have the horse before the cart can be pulled, but we've got the horse more or less there. Now let's get the damn cart filled with the right opportunities and move down the road, because I think we're not as far away as we might think.
Great, thank you, David. Matthew, how about you? What do you think on that question?
Yeah, so I agree with both David and Brad. I think for me, it's the realization we have come a long way. Obviously, I don't think anyone disagrees with there's lots of work left to be done. But I think the big one is the sharing of that message. I don't think it's well known how far along things have come. And I, sometimes it can be uncomfortable to kind of, pat yourself on the back and pound your chest about D&I types of initiatives, because there is that understanding that there is still a long way to go. So it can be tough to, think about when it is the right time to, loud and proudly say what you've done. But I still think, David's point about the opportunities being there and hearing that, this is the most significant procurement opportunity that we've seen, my worry is that, communities that aren't being represented will continue to be kind of left behind, because they don't have that. There's no history there of spotting these opportunities. So sure, there are some businesses in the space that can absolutely recognize these opportunities, but I think on a larger scale, there needs to be that support to help businesses, recognize what opportunities do exist. And also, David, to your point, getting your business to a place, even administratively, so you can bid on these, contracts, that's a huge gap, right? So what supports do we have in place? And maybe that's working with partners, like ourselves or like Ulnaweg, whoever makes sense, and saying, okay, what can we put in place to make sure that these businesses, know, there are these portals and places where they can view opportunities, and that there is some background work that needs to be done, and here's some help to get that work done, because we can all recognize there's opportunities, but when some of the policy language has things like, to the best of your ability, and it's kind of that softer language of, absolutely a start, but no one came out, so I guess, we'll move forward with the next person. The reality is that people didn't know that, those opportunities existed. So making sure we put the effort to get the word out and taking steps, and this isn't a criticism, but taking the steps past, say, social media, and actually getting in the community and working with the partners and saying, we want to share every opportunity with you, making sure that they get out, because people just still don't know.
I can't agree with you more. That's the thing. We've been waiting for a long time to. It's there. We just need the right people to have the opportunity at it. And I think that's the work that's in front of organizations like yours and mine and Brad's, for that matter.
Genevieve, jump in.
Yeah, Genevieve's got the answer to this one. I know she
Yeah.
does.
Oh, unfortunately, because again, government can only do so much with, as you all noted, without their partners and people to work with us. There is still a bit of an intimidation factor when doing business with government, because again, there's old school thinking that we're still trying to get rid of, but it's still legacy thoughts. So we are trying, again, to your point, yes, we do have social media, we do have websites, we do have outreach to different communities, again, not all, certain communities, outreach to vendors, we have training sessions, great, fantastic. But I am actually very interested to hear your opinions on how best to get involved and get to that deeper level to get people coming to the table. Because again, we also have that same issue of we're not getting all the responses that we want. We want to see people participate. We encourage people to participate. So it's truly getting that question to you guys of how do we do this? How can I'm sorry, I'm turning the tables around here.
Yeah, but I'll give you an example. Some of it's about the small business piece, but I just want to, on the labor capital example, we now have a full-time person in Cape Breton that is working with those groups and connecting those groups with the contractors, and with those contractors, so the subcontractors are winning the contracts, and we've got a full-time person up there that's actually going out and working within those communities. And we have several people doing that work, and also looking to doing the same in the mainland. I think. But the opportunity is not just around the human resource side of the equation, and it is also about the next level to the community benefits is how do you build in social entrepreneurship? How do you build in pieces that starts having the companies that are being fostered by the Black Business Initiative that start bidding on some of the supply chain work that happens after the project is being built. So there's a whole bunch, we've taken a first step with the apprenticeship and underrepresented groups, but there's a whole bunch of additional steps. They're already there if we get this going. My biggest fear, and I think our biggest risk, is that we soften up and back off on not doing the same on the mainland when the big projects in the mainland. That's my biggest fear.
You know that Ulnaweg and Member 2 and places like that have done very well because of federal policy relating to partnering on contracts. It was a strategic initiative of the federal government around procurement that was done a decade and a half ago, and it fundamentally changed outcomes in some of those communities. Why don't we do the same thing here? Why don't we? I mean, if you recognize that businesses are on a continuum from micro businesses to quite large businesses, and that most of the equity-seeking groups, for the most part, have businesses on the underdeveloped end of that spectrum for a variety of reasons that Matthew articulated pretty damn well, I thought. So how do we incentivize that process on the small end, on the small contract end, so that these businesses can grow into the capacity needed to take on larger and larger contracts? There's all kinds of precedent out there to show how that can be done. And I would, anytime you want to have a chat about that, I'd be glad to.
Well, I mean, that is a bit of part of this conversation. So I want to jump in there, David, and not let you get off the hook that easy. You know, Genevieve took this down a road, and I just want to pursue it a little bit. And then I'll come, Matthew, I'll give you a chance to answer this, to jump in on Genevieve's question as well. Are there a couple examples that jump to mind, David, like nationally even, and I think of Build out west in BC jumps to mind as an organization that's come a long way. But you know, just for Genevieve's point of view, are there a couple examples that come right to mind from a view of that continuum of a small, socially minded company that's become, you know, significantly large?
In 19, I'm not going to get the dates right. In 1990, Member 2 had 72% unemployment. They just bought half of Clearwater.
Right. Simple one.
There's a good example.
Yeah. But okay, so what did it take to get them there?
It took a program and a policy decision by the federal government, which I think might have been the John Turner government. I got to admit, I'm not clear which government it was at the time.
And you're dating yourself.
Yeah, my father told me about it. No, so the thing is, they had, Member 2 had some smart people. They had Dan Christmas, they had Chief Paul, they had really motivated, bright people who saw the opportunity, organized themselves to take advantage of that opportunity, and then leveraged it to the max. And what they did was they didn't have the skills internally to do that, but they partnered with like Lockheed Martin and corporations like that to get to that place. But it was Lockheed Martin's was incentivized to make those partnerships because they weren't going to get the damn contract if they didn't. And the result was, over time, Member 2 and those host of businesses that Member 2 Development Corporation own grew into a pretty, they don't need Lockheed Martin these days, let's put it that way. So I'm saying that we know it works. Build as another example, but there are lots of, there are those kinds of opportunities where we can do that. And we don't have to just, Member 2 didn't start with buying Clearwater. You know, they started with, you know, a $50,000 service contract. They started with that. And I think we need to make that a priority in our regular procurement. And the way you do is you incentivize staff to do it. It sounds really easy sitting where I am, for sure, because I don't have to do the work. And Genevieve, you know, I don't mean to make it sound like it's nothing or trivial, because I know it's hard, but it can be done. I believe it.
Yeah, great. Thank you, David. Matthew, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so I love the Member 2 example, and I think also too there is that just little bit of I guess complication of recognizing that, you know, partnerships are an essential part of this. Even in kind of preparing for today, that was something I wrote down more times than I'd like to admit. But I think back to my point about you know, one of the biggest gaps in our community is that lack of role models, lack of network, lack of partners. So I think, you know, and this is where organizations like ours come in and say, you know, who are the trusted partners? Because there are challenges with trust. There are challenges with, you know, if I partner with this other organization, what are the risks? Because it is new. And so I think having the support to help people navigate that is extremely important. And in terms of the information sharing, one small example of something that we're working on right now is just more specific, targeted information type sessions. So I think lots of times we do, you know, info session, and it's, you know, procurement in Nova Scotia. And while that's very important and necessary, and we should keep doing that, I think it's built in a way that you kind of get this sense that if I, you know, skip this one, I'll catch the next one. But I think having a more targeted approach where we say, you know, procurement opportunities in construction for Black-owned businesses in Nova Scotia. I think when we're specific like that, that's when, and maybe it's even in terms of size, and maybe it's opportunities for Black-owned construction companies, in under $5 million in revenue. And so I think sometimes when you get specific enough, then you bring the people out that are relevant, and they realize this is an important one. This is something to consider. And this talks very specifically to me. So I assume the value of going to the session is going to be significant. So those are the types of things that we're kind of working through, because when it is through a trusted partner, Common Good, BBI, the list is huge. That trust is already there, and there's the expectation that there's going to be a little bit of support in navigating the maze that can be, the government. I've worked in municipal, I haven't been in provincial or federal, but it's complicated for sure. You get in there and you learn the ropes, but as an outsider, it's very challenging. So making sure that we're there to support that.
Thank you, Matthew. Brian and Genevieve, anything you want to add there, or did that answer your question, Genevieve?
That partially answers my question. No, it is very complicated. Again, government is a beast. I mean, it's a system that you have to work through and keep pushing at it bit by bit by bit to get that change. Again, we've come a long way. Is there still a way to go? Oh, definitely, 100%. Oh, that's a great quote. Sorry, just popped up from Marjorie.
Yeah, it is a great quote.
So it's great to hear, though, that we do have opportunities and places to go to kind of help that. And I've taken down a couple of notes on how to kind of maybe try to tweak some of the things we're doing. We are coming out with a couple of changes to our policy shortly. Again, minor tweaks, but I think they will be good for the community that we're talking about right now. So no, great.
Thank you, Genevieve. And I apologize, the question is not going where we thought it was going to go, but I think this discussion is too valuable to steer it any other way, to be quite honest. Something popped into my mind as Genevieve just asking, that is just speaking there. Do you folks think that as these large procurement contracts start to come down the pipe, Cape Breton is a huge example, but as Brad said, that is going to spread to the mainland over the next several years. Is it a partial question of having the right people at the table? Is there a place where, as we look at SMEs not being ready and the underrepresented community not being ready, are they at the right tables to have input into what's happening in their own province? Because again, I get the sense, and I live this stuff, as do you guys, we're talking multi-billions of dollars. How many small SMEs in Cape Breton and how many small SMEs across the province are kind of going, geez, could I get a piece of that? I'll throw that out there. I'll let anyone answer who wants to jump in first.
Maybe I'll start out. When I see the quick wins, I see it on the labor force supply side, and I think that's where we are. And because in the labor force supply side, you're dealing with individuals. You can train. The systems are in place. The groups are in place. There's support networks in place. There's support training in place. So just on the, even if we're very successful in getting moving that ball forward, that significantly changes the communities in which those people live, work, and play. And so the labor supply, I think, is a quick win, and it's a quick win because you can pull those levers, and it's a huge lever. The ones we're talking about for the SMEs and things like that, that's more complex. It's more time because you're talking generating capital and educating and things like that. So that's more complex. So my emphasis in line, and again, I've worked on the business retention expansion side over my career and the SMEs, and did a partnership with BBI years ago when I was with and those are really hard, difficult, and moving forward. But on the labor supply side, man, we can pull that one tomorrow. And we are pulling that one tomorrow, and all the systems are in place to support that.
That's great insight, Brad. I mean, when I think a lot about this issue and have over the years, that piece it doesn't come up enough. We talk a lot about business development from the SMEs and the small community-based organizations, but labor supply side is huge. And right now there is no labor available. The shortage in labor across every sector is massive.
So here's what I would say. We don't have a lack of belly buttons. We got a mismatch in skills. We have a lot of underemployed people. And so when we start talking about, the Black community, Indigenous community, and all these other underrepresented groups, they are underemployed. They are a labor force that are available to us today.
Yeah.
And we need that labor force. So that we skill up. There's the training places in place, and it has a significant economic and social economic benefit right there. That is at our hands today.
Yeah.
And so when I say, do we have a skilled labor or do we have a labor shortage? Well, I think we got some mismatches. We got the labor supply is getting tighter, which I think is, Brian alluded to earlier, that is forcing people to look into using more underrepresented groups as part of the labor force. And keep in mind, the skilled labor shortage, all through COVID, we've had a direct flight back and forth to Calgary. So people are still choosing to travel back and forth every day to other places. So let's, the labor shortage is a nuanced thing. And if I'm somebody from an underrepresented community who's unemployed, and I hear labor shortage and I'm unemployed sitting at home, I think that's a huge risk that we need to address directly.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight, and at least we pick on a department of government that's not Genevieve in that one, so that's good. Labor skills and immigration, and I know they are talking about them. We're talking about that with them, so there is action there as well. David, anything you want to add there?
Other than I agree with Brad, the fast win, the important win, the big dollar win in the short term is through employment, and it's. Most of the pieces, almost all the pieces are in place. The long game that we have to take, though, is to build up the business capacity to really grow our own ecosystem, grow our own infrastructure so that we can do this work for ourselves. And that includes the African Nova Scotia community for sure, the African Canadian community. It includes First Nations community. It includes the immigrant community. We need to do that work, and we can start where we are. I mean, and one is not exclusive. We don't have to just do one. We don't have to pick. We can do them. Let's just do them. And, I want to say for the record that I don't see procurement services as I don't see this conversation as oppositional. I see it as really, we need to find ways. It's like, we're all tied together in a three-legged race here. We don't have any choice. We got to just run the path that we're on, and we got to do it together because we don't have any choice. So it's just finding the right way to do it. And to that end, Genevieve, for years we had a committee. It was just social enterprise procurement specifically, but maybe and it stopped over the last year or so when Linda left. But it's not even so much that. That's what we need anymore. What we need is to have a committee that can serve, and even just an advisory where we talk about those things so we can all go back to our constituencies and say, this is what's happening. This is what we're thinking about. It doesn't have to be a really big committee, but I think that we'd all benefit from more regular conversations, and COVID has sort of interrupted a lot of that.
COVID definitely has thrown a loop for a loop in many.
Sure. Yeah.
We also, and David, you've worked with one of our main resources for many years in sustainable procurement, and we unfortunately have lost that resource. But
Yep.
This is what we're kind of going and doing a refresh.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I'm told I'm being kicked out of this room, so I do apologize. I'm going to have to step out early. But definitely, I would love to stay in touch with all of you just to see that we can keep the conversation going, because I think we definitely do have opportunities to work together. And kind of increase. And David, yeah, definitely, since you've lost your main touch point, just feel free to reach out to me and we can circle back on that.
And Genevieve, this is being recorded. So Genevieve, if you want to watch the last 15 or 20 minutes later on, you can get it off our website anytime. And we can update. There's a few government questions, so we'll forward them to you after the event as well. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great day.
Thank you. Matthew, anything you wanted to add there on that before we wrap up sort of the panel and move into some questions?
Yeah, I would just quickly say, it hasn't been until, the past year and a half, 2 years that, as I sit at more of these types of tables, you don't really realize how many, places that you're not represented. And obviously BBI is one example of many organizations who do great work. So, I think I would love to make a point for everyone on the call, and something that I always kind of preach is that, it is everyone's responsibility to look around the table and actively, have the discussion of who's not here, and making sure that we're always asking who's not here at the table. And, there are some very forward thinking organizations that, always leave one chair empty at boardroom tables. Just, that's the people that aren't here. So, I think we always need to recognize that, you obviously can't fill a table with, 100 people. But I think when we make decisions and when we have these conversations, it is an important thing to consider, because we don't know where, we're not represented. And that if we look at Nova Scotia as a province, what sort of innovative, discussions and conversations are happening nationally that we're not in that mix. We don't even know. So I think that's a challenge there, but it's everyone's responsibility to look at the table.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. I think that's a brilliant insight, Matthew. It's look around the table, who's not represented, because that's the only way that those groups are going to get invited to that table, with conscious recognition that they're not there. So thank you all for that panel. It's unfortunate Genevieve and Brian had to step away, because we love to pick on government. But I'm just going to go back to some of the questions in the time we have left, and open it up a little bit. And some of them are comments more than questions, but I think they're important to share with the group. And in the chat, Marjorie says another group that ought to be part of the 10% is older adults, and that's becoming more and more evident in Nova Scotia as the population ages. So speaking of the three old white guys on this panel, thank you, Marjorie, for that acknowledgement. I think it's important that that ageism is a thing, and there's a lot of talent in that market. Marjorie made another comment. Considering the healthcare system, targeted groups don't apply because the system is viewed as white. According to ISANS, however, targeted groups will apply to designated positions. The healthcare system hasn't gone this route yet, but I think it is essential. So again, more of a comment than a question. So thank you, Marjorie, for that. Really appreciate that input. Leslie has joined us, and I think Leslie has some great stories about employment during COVID and what her organization has achieved with labor skills in this marketplace. And Leslie, I'm going to go back to one of your first comments about government values, what they buy, and even though David responded to that, and I agree with both sides of that argument. You've probably read this book, Leslie, and I'll just throw it out there, but certainly, and so has David, I'm sure, Sean Loney's book. I'm trying to think of the title, David, off the top of my head. Beautiful Bailout is a book that Sean Loney from Manitoba talks exactly about that topic, that when governments talk to big business, they buy procurement. When governments talk to not-for-profits and social enterprises, they talk about a service that they're paying, that they're supporting, not paying for. And Sean's argument is that these organizations need to go to government because they are providing a service and get paid for that service, just like any other business. So it's a pretty broad argument. Some agree with some of it, some agree with all of it, some agree with none of it. But it is a good read, and I'd encourage you to go down that route. There's a question, Leslie, there for government, so I'll make sure that we get that off to Brian and Genevieve after. There's a congratulations from Leslie to Mainland Nova Scotia Building Trades for being proactive in your approach to connecting with community. So they certainly appreciate you reaching out to them. But I think, Leslie's organization, Metro Works, is a great example of what can be done. And it's a shame that it's taken a crisis to recognize that there's an untapped labor market that have skills that can contribute to the economy in a huge way. So I'm thrilled that that's worked out for Leslie's organization throughout this pandemic. And Leslie also states Akai Energy is now part of a multi-million-dollar procurement contracts. They managed to shift the conversation with the BC government and investors to look beyond funding to outcome purchasing. So she puts a link up there as well for anyone who may have some interest in that.
Sean was involved with that too.
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Sean Loney was involved with that as well.
Oh, was he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sean has his finger on a lot of those pies, especially at web.
He's running for mayor in Winnipeg.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Let me go back to some more questions. Denise asks a question: as a woman-owned small business owner, WBE certified member of the Center for Women in Business in Halifax Chamber, it is very difficult to find opportunities or who to speak to support. I follow the buy sell. It does take time. It does take time on a chance. We have full line detail and proactive coatings. They are being purchased somewhere. What about working with the diversity groups direct with opportunities available, and who are the trusted partners? For example, we can support products to those who provide labor. How do we make this easier? Any thoughts from anyone on that panel?
It's just not easy. I mean, it's just really, there's just some things that are hard. And I think that it's the piece that she talks about. There has to be, Matthew talked about this for sure. If people don't know that the opportunity is there, it's not an opportunity. So the question is, if we have a government that operates a procurement process, and I would include all levels of government in this, that is geared to simplicity. It's easier to buy everything from one person. I had a meeting with a senior person in a large academic institution in Nova Scotia, I won't go further than that, who said that he spent the first 5 years of his tenure as a president of the organization trying to consolidate procurement. And so because it simplified and streamlined his supply chain, it made it simpler, and he figured he could save money. This institution has remote sites in various parts of the province. The suppliers in those places, I would presume, without knowing for sure, lost opportunity. So there's this kind of like, but this all happens in a space, and that's sort of, I would suggest not best value thinking. And so how do we shift the thinking institutionally for that to happen? And then how do we, because if we do that and we democratize the process so that information flows out more readily, then and I think one of the ways you do it is you do it by assigning not just equity employment opportunities or designated employment opportunities, but designated procurement opportunities. Start to build awareness, and so get people involved by giving them a $15,000 contract and get them in the system. I mean, this is a crawl, walk, run process, and we gotta do this in the right steps. We can't start by running.
Yeah, no, I agree, David. And it kind of leads into a bit of a next question I have for you folks is, there's no question that government has a huge role here. The biggest procurement budgets in this country are government based. There's two ways to go about it. There's incentive, or there's forcing this issue to become local. What's your perspective, and how does government look at those two options?
I'll jump into that one, because you also hear the argument, it's got to be open to everybody across the. When you put certain things in place, you default you're supporting local. For example, when you say you have to have apprentices, that anybody from Quebec or Ontario, anybody can bid on that project, but it's going to be more painful to do it for them to register their apprentices in Nova Scotia. So there is ways they can do that and support local. Government has a social mandate to build a better community, better lives, things like that. And they can choose what color the paint is on the walls of the buildings they build, and they can also choose the other procurement requirements. So if they want to move their agenda forward on social benefits, the procurement is the biggest lever they have. And therefore, if you want to support that policy, you support it through procurement. And so I do not take that, we can't do that because of interprovincial trade agreements and all that sort of stuff. Anybody can bid on the projects, but we want a local workforce. You want to drive somebody crazy, is build a building by government taxpayer money while there's people watching it outside the fence as somebody comes in from out of province to do that because they're the cheapest, lowest bid. That will drive people crazy. Now they can bid on the project, but there should be a requirement in that to support the ESG principles, and then we support our local companies to meet or help them meet those principles.
Yeah, agree 100%. Anyone else want to jump in there before I ask a follow-up on that one? How do we make that happen, Brad?
Well, again, the latest example, just with that, what they've done with the procurement for the Cape Breton infrastructure projects, it's a perfect example. There was a lot of research. I was working on that file for 5 years on the research. There's a lot of supporting research on that, on the impacts of that. And we finally got it here in the province of Nova Scotia. And the private sector actually led on that. Where I first saw that work is with Shell Canada and other organizations in Western Canada took a leadership role. I also had the opportunity to meet with the procurement manager for the new JFK airport. And he says, you do not build any kind of infrastructure in today's world without involving local community. Infrastructure is for the local community, and the local community needs to be fully engaged right through the whole 3 stages of the process that David described earlier as part of that. So that's how you do it. That's the lever. Follow the money. The money is the lever.
Always, yeah. And you guys made a good point when Genevieve was on there. I think government has moved a ways. I think they have a long ways to go. There's still very much a mindset, and that there's too many roadblocks to make it happen. But there are simple wins, as you just said, Brad. These are some of these things can be done easily if there's a will, and that speaks a bit to the long-term legacy. We're not talking just about short-term. You train people; they have a job for life. So there's a lot of that.
Statistically, if you get somebody that's in one of those projects, it's an underrepresented group, and they get through that one of those projects, 75% of them now then have a sustainable job. So that's a person that's gone from a $12 job, working poor and not a career. And then with one of those projects, all of a sudden you've got a person that's now making, a financially stable job and supporting their family. That's in the cost benefit analysis on that is just extraordinary. It's just extraordinary.
David?
I mean, it's just that we're working with folks from the community right now, putting in the pre-trades positions. We're trying to get, and we're doing that work with some folks in the community, and it just pays off. It's crazy not to do it. I mean, we have a guy who went from $12 an hour to $22 an hour and a unionized job. Like, the difference is everything, right?
Yeah, I think one of you mentioned it earlier. These large organizations, that the ACONs of the world, they know how to do it. Sometimes they won't do it unless they're nudged in the right direction. But for the province, it may cost a few more bucks in procurement, but the payout is 1 to 5 to 10 times over 20 and 30 years.
In the States, they have something called the Davis-Bacon Act. And what happens in that, in many of the states, and under that act, they establish what a trade person would make on a particular trade, whether it's an iron worker or a carpenter. And they state, this is what that wage is worth in this market. And nobody's allowed to bid on those projects without paying at least that minimum standard. And so what it stops is it stops the race to the bottom, where you're using labor to discount to win the project.
Right.
And that's so there's examples of that, and it's called a prevailing wage. We had a prevailing wage policy in Canada, but the federal government that was taken out in a 1-line statement in a 300-page omnibus bill. So prevailing wage in the HRM is now said that you must pay a living wage for some of their subcontractors. So there's things they can do that hit the trigger. And we had people argue against the wage setting a prevailing wage or for the HRM subcontractors, because it said they wanted to treat everybody the same. So they didn't want their workforce getting $12 an hour on one project and then making $20 an hour on an HRM project. It's like, that's the thinking we've got to get past. That's the culture. We got to go past. Let's do it cheap, quick. We got to think of long-term value, and that's tough for a business that's trying to do business every day. I get that. That's why government needs to lead.
I agree. Government does need to lead in that benefit. And I go back to David and I have been at a couple social procurement conferences over the last number of years. And when I think back to what, David, 4 years ago, the community benefit agreement for construction association for construction jobs federally was in the Senate 4 years ago and had passed third reading and still hasn't been put into law, because the lobby group is so strong that they cannot get the support to get community benefit agreements in federal procurement legislation. So, that kind of stuff is a shame, and based on the benefit that it would provide.
You look at the Nobel Prize in economics this year. It was on raising the minimum wage. And I mean, that's not exactly the same conversation, but every study, every significant look at it shows that every time you raise wages for the lowest amount of people, the economy booms. To say nothing of the individual lives that are impacted. In Alberta, they took the wage from $11.55 to $15. Small business, and I'm a small business owner. I mean, I'm not like, the small business world in Alberta said it's going to ruin it. In a year and a half after that, it created 131,000 new jobs in the services. Like, nobody didn't make money.
Yeah.
But we just shared it a little bit more equitably. It's really, there are no logical reasons for us to do anything other than do something like have a prevailing wage.
Yeah, agreed. I just get back to a couple of comments here. So as before we get to a wrap up, I mean, Leslie makes another good point. Organizations that produce a value outcome and are not looking to tackle an entire contract. We need a cultural shift amongst government and business. When we are prepared to shift away from doing things to people to working alongside people, the shift will happen faster. Smaller enterprise will learn and grow through each procurement experience. I think that's a pretty valid thought as we start to wrap up our discussion. And then an anonymous attendee has posted a point as well. Do local businesses publicize their procurement wins? Would this help other local businesses to probably learn and bid? I think that's kind of a neat little addition to this conversation. It's all about communication, as Matthew said earlier. It's just not well known. Even the stuff, Brad, that you guys are doing, it's not well known in the general community what the opportunities are. I mean, it scares me that we're talking billions of dollars of procurement in this province, and people aren't aware of the impact it can have.
Yeah, it's huge. And again, we talked about earlier the relationships. I've known Leslie for 20 years or more. So she called me up and said, "Hey, Brad, I'm doing this." It was a quick conversation, and in one meeting we say, "Okay." I connected her with a whole bunch of opportunities. So we've now got a funnel for some of those groups for, is it perfect? We'll work it through, but it's working. And so again, it's relationships, it's the trust, it's information. And, the chamber plays a very, very critical role in that, obviously, because you're a hub of information and connectivity. So that's good. And I'm glad you're doing this type of discussions. And having this kind of dialogue. I think that's very, very helpful because it helps educate when you have the business leaders of the business community having these conversations. It helps people shift their thinking. So well done on that.
Yeah, appreciate that. And thank you. So on that note, I think unless anyone has any real burning issue they want to talk about or contribute, I'm going to start to wrap us up. And what I'd love to do is really get a final thought from each of you on this topic or any piece of this topic that still is burning in you that we haven't chatted about today, or just to summarize where you think this is going or needs to go in the near, mid, and long term. Brad, again, I'll start with you, seeing as how you kicked us off today.
No, I just say that the opportunity we have before us right now is a game changer. We can, with the government procurement and things are going on right now, this is a legacy opportunity right now with our government and with this province to shift the economic and social well-being through just pulling some very powerful but sort of very simple levers. We can change the world for a lot of people. So I'm full in on this one. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thanks, Brad. David.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are making many of the right steps. I think that on the labor side, we've done a very, credible job, and that we need to start to work on the procurement side of it from a small and medium-sized business perspective, from economically seeking groups, and to that end, this sort of feels like dominoes, and so we're at the start of this thing, and we need to hold all of our governments, our municipal governments, our provincial governments, our federal government, our First Nations governments accountable. And it has to be a priority for them. All the math says it's a good plan. I've never heard anybody make a credible argument to say this is a bad idea. Not ever.
Yeah.
So like, it's like we're arguing about nothing. People who are reluctant to do it are doing it because either they're lazy or stupid. That's all. I don't want to beat around the bush.
No, I appreciate the frank talk. And the only arguments against any of this, David, has always been regulatory. We can't do it because, right? Which is nonsense. So yeah,
it's not true.
No,
it's just
Matthew. Sorry, Dave. Matthew, final thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess my three kind of big takeaways and thoughts are, again, the communication and spreading of awareness of opportunities still remains a significant challenge. So just making sure that we're tapping into the right networks in all the things that we do. And I think there's a need to David's point on accountability. I think there is a significant need to have performance as part of the equation and that accountability piece, and who is participating in these opportunities. If we're not seeing members of certain communities, I think that just shows a miss on the part of the teams working on that specific opportunity. So obviously everyone's working hard and lots of great things are happening. I certainly do not want to discredit that. But I think that participation rate is something that should be a metric for evaluation. And then I think the other one is we recognize consumer behavior is changing. We recognize that people are essentially voting with their dollars, and they're really starting to look deeper at organizations and who they are spending their money with, and what is the outside of the cost of this product, what is the mission and vision and those pieces behind the organization. And I think there is that opportunity for government to continue, as I think we are being intentional with our spending, but to constantly be on the lookout, to always be more intentional with how we are spending our money, because I think it's only a matter of time before the general public does start to look at, okay, how is the government spending our money? What organizations are they investing in? What are the mandates of those organizations? Because it's an extension of our own spending habits and our own spending ability. So I would worry that we're going to find ourselves in a situation where the push is coming from the public. And I'm sure as a government, it would be in a much better position to be intentional before the pressure comes from the public. So those are my thoughts. And then obviously, as always, very open to any conversation to build communications and build networks in the community, not just the Black community, but do whatever I can as a, D&I champion to make connections where I can. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. Totally agree with your comments. So to wrap up, I just want to thank you guys all for being here today. I want to thank all the people that joined us today. Obviously there's a lot of passion around this subject here in this chat. We have a lot of passion for it here at the Chamber, and hope to continue to lead, in the community on this issue. This localized procurement strategy over the next number of years is critical to the economic development of the province. So we'll be there to support it. So again, thanks, Brad, Dave, Matthew, Brian, and Genevieve, who are no longer here, but we'll certainly send them some thanks for taking the time. I mean, it's a busy time for everyone. So, taking the time out of your schedules to sit with us and have this valuable discussion is critically important to us and to the member community that we support. So on that note, next Wednesday, we're actually having an in-person event at the Chamber. Business After Hours is at DASC, so the Dartmouth Adult Service Center here in Dartmouth. So if you can join us, it's a fabulous facility and it's a fabulous place to have a in-person get together. And if you haven't had the chance to be in person with colleagues, it's a lot of fun after a year and a half of not doing it. So I encourage everyone who's online to join us, and you can register for that free online. So on that note, thank you all for joining us. Great conversation, and we hope to chat with you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.